Her twins were crying from hunger in the forest, and a mountain man took off his coat and hugged them. Alone in the snow, he thought they were strangers until he saw the necklace clutched in their tiny hands. A necklace he'd given to the woman he once loved decades ago. Their mother had died trying to bring them to him, and now the lawmen of a hard town are coming to take the children away. The mountain man's cabin fills with firelight and prayer, but prejudice, sickness, and bitter snow close in from every side. What hidden truths lie inside their mother's journal? Can a lonely man of the wilderness truly protect the family he never knew he had? And when the town turns against blood and heritage, will he stand or lose the only chance at redemption God has ever given him? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The snow fell softly through the darkening forest, coating the pine branches in a delicate white blanket. Ephraim Holt trudged through the deepening drifts, his warm boots leaving clear tracks behind him. The elk he'd been tracking had given him the slip, but his experience told him it was time to head back anyway. Dark clouds gathered overhead, promising more snow before nightfall. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it something that made Ephraim pause mid-step. He tilted his head, listening. There a sound that didn't belong in these woods. A whimper, thin and frightened, like a wounded animal. But something about it raised the hair on the back of his neck. That wasn't an animal's cry. Ephraim turned slowly, his weathered face creasing with concern. The sound came again, clearer. This time, a child's sob. His heart hammered against his ribs as he moved toward the noise, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten whoever was out there. Near a fallen log crusted with snow, he found them. Two small figures huddled together. There, thin clothes no match for the bitter cold. A boy and girl, mirror images of each other, with dark hair and hollow cheeks. Twins, he realized, no more than 6 years old. Their lips had turned an alarming shade of blue, and they clung to each other like two leaves in a storm. Lord have mercy, Ephraim breathed. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his heavy wool coat. The cold bit through his buckskin shirt, but he didn't feel it. He knelt in the snow before the children, his movements slow and gentle. "It's all right now," he said softly, the way he might speak to a spooked horse. "You're safe." He wrapped his coat around both children, gathering them against his chest. They were too light in his arms, their small bodies trembling violently. The girl's eyes, wide and dark, met his. Though fear showed plainly on her face, there was something else there too, a spark of hope, of trust. Her tiny hand clutched something tight against her chest. As Ephraim rocked them gently, murmuring quiet words of comfort, her grip slowly loosened. A glint of silver caught his eye. Dangling from a worn piece of rawhide was a cross, not just any cross, but one he knew as well as his own hands. The metal was tarnished now, but the careful curves and delicate etching were unmistakable. Each mark had been carved by his own knife, 25 years ago, for a woman with laughing eyes and hair the color of chestnuts. "Mary," he whispered, the name rough in his throat. His hands began to shake as he stared at the necklace he'd made. For Mary Lathrop, the woman he'd loved and lost so long ago. The woman whose family had deemed him unworthy, sending her away before they could marry. The boy stirred against his chest, looking up at Ephraim with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. Eyes that reminded him of Mary's, filled with that same quiet strength. Questions crowded Ephraim's mind, fighting with the urgent need to get these children to safety. How did they come to have Mary's necklace? Where'd they come from, and where was their family? But the growing darkness and falling snow demanded action first. "Let's get you both warm," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. He gathered the twins closer, making sure the coat covered them completely. "My cabin's not far." We'll get some food in your bellies and sort everything else out after." The girl's small fingers clutched his shirt. "Promise you won't leave us?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Ephraim's throat tightened. "I promise." The words came without thought, but he knew they were true. Whatever twist of fate had brought these children to his woods, he couldn't abandon them. Not when they might be connected to Mary. Not when they needed him so desperately. He rose carefully, cradling both children against his chest. Their shivering had lessened somewhat, but they still felt far too cold. As he turned toward home, the silver cross swung gently from the girl's hand, catching the last light of day. That necklace had been a promise once, a promise of love and family that never came to be. Now, holding these two fragile lives close to his heart, Ephraim felt the weight of a new promise settling onto his shoulders. The snow continued to fall. As he carried them home, each step taking him further from his solitary life and towards something he thought he'd lost forever, the chance to be part of a family. Ephraim gathered the twins close, making sure his coat wrapped securely around their small bodies. The boy's head lolled against his shoulder, while the girl kept her grip tight on the silver cross. Their weakness worried him. They felt like two bird-like bundles in his arms. "Stay with me now," he murmured, starting the trek home. Just a little ways to go. The trail wound steep through the pines, made treacherous by fresh snow. Ephraim picked each step with care, speaking softly to keep the children alert. He told them about his warm cabin, the soup he'd make them, the soft bed waiting ahead. The girl's eyes fluttered open at the mention of food, but the boy remained still, his breathing shallow. "That's right, little one," Ephraim encouraged when the girl shifted slightly. "Stay awake for me. We're almost there." After what felt like hours, the cabin's dark shape emerged through the falling snow. Smoke still curled from the chimney. Thank Providence he'd banked the fire well before leaving. Ephraim shouldered through the door, the warmth inside hitting him like a physical wave. He laid the children gently on his narrow bunk, adding his quilts and a bearskin over them. The fire needed tending first. He added kindling and logs until flames leaped high, throwing welcome heat through the one-room cabin. All the while, he kept glancing at the twins, making sure they still breathed. Moving to his stores, Ephraim pulled out dried venison and cornmeal. He worked quickly, adding both to a pot of water hanging over the fire. The familiar motions of cooking steadied his shaking hands, though his mind raced with questions about Mary's necklace. While the broth simmered, he pulled his chair close to the bunk. The girl's eyes tracked his movements, though the boy hadn't. Stirred, Ephraim dipped a tin cup into the warm broth, blowing on it gently. "Here now," he said, helping the girl sit up slightly. "Small sips, that's it." She managed a few swallows before turning her face away. Ephraim coaxed the boy to drink next, relief flooding through him when those dark eyes finally opened. The twins took turns with the broth, each drinking only a little, but it was something. The girl's fingers hadn't loosened from the necklace. As Ephraim settled her back against the pillow, she spoke in a whisper so faint he had to lean close to hear. "Mama said, find the man by the mountains." Her voice quavered. "She said he'd help us." Ephraim's heart clenched. "Your mama, where is she?" The words caught in his throat. The boy's eyes filled with tears. "She's sleeping," he murmured. "In the snow. We tried to wake her, but she wouldn't get up." The truth hit Ephraim like a physical blow. Mary, his Mary, had died trying to bring these children to him. The woman he'd loved all these years, who'd carried his necklace across what must have been many miles, had perished in these mountains searching for him. "Oh, Mary," he whispered, his vision blurring. "What happened to you?" The girl held out the silver cross, her small hand trembling. "Mama said give this to the mountain man. Said it would help him know us." Ephraim took the necklace gently, running his thumb over the familiar engravings. How many times had he traced these same patterns while carving them, dreaming of the future he and Mary would share? Now here sat what must be her children, perhaps his own flesh and blood, while she lay somewhere in the vast whiteness, forever beyond his reach. He sank into his chair beside the bunk, one rough hand stroking the silver cross, while the other reached out to rest on the children's blanket-covered feet. "Mary," he whispered again, the name a prayer and a lament. In his heart, he made a solemn vow. These children would want for nothing. He would protect them with his life, raise them with all the love their mother had shown in bringing them to him. The twins drifted into exhausted sleep as the night deepened. Ephraim kept vigil, adding wood to the fire, offering sips of broth. When they stirred, as dawn's first gray light filtered through the cabin's single window, he heard the children cry out, not in fear or pain, but in response to something outside. Rough voices carried through the morning air, followed by the crunch of boots in snow. Someone pounded on his cabin door. "Hello, the house." A man called. "Anyone alive in there?" Ephraim rose slowly from his chair, glancing at the twins who now huddled together, wide-eyed and trembling. He'd known the peace of their first night couldn't last. The world was coming to his door, bringing with it questions he wasn't ready to answer. The cabin door burst open with a bang that made the twins cry out in fear. Cold air and snow swirled in as three men shouldered their way inside, rifles held ready. Deputy Silas Brogan led them, his hard eyes sweeping the cabin before fixing on Ephraim. "Well now," Brogan drawled, brushing snow from his coat, "what have we here?" Ephraim moved slowly to stand between the men and the bunk where the children huddled. These little ones were near frozen in the forest. "I brought them in last night." "That so?" Brogan's boots scraped across the wooden floor as he stepped closer. "Wouldn't happen to know anything about their mother, would you? Indian woman, traveling alone?" The deputy's tone made Ephraim's shoulders tighten. What about her? She helped herself to supplies at Thompson's trading post 3 days back. Took food, blankets, even a horse. Brogan's lip curled. "Course, we found the horse this morning. And her too, frozen stiff in the snow about 2 miles south. Thieving's a serious crime, Holt." "She was trying to save her children," Ephraim growled, his fists clenching at his sides. One of the other men spoke up, a shopkeeper Ephraim recognized from town. "Law's the law. Those half-breed youngsters will have to come with us. County orphanage can sort them out." "No." Ephraim planted his feet wider, feeling the twins press against his legs through the blankets. "They're staying right here. That ain't your choice to make." Brogan raised his rifle slightly. "I've got papers from the county judge giving authority to collect any orphans for proper placement. Step aside." I said no. Ephraim's voice was quiet but firm. His own pistol lay on the table behind him, but he knew reaching for it would only make things worse. These children nearly died in that snow. They're weak, hungry. They need rest and care, not a long trip to some orphanage. The third man, younger than the others, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we could give them a day or two, Deputy." Weather's turning bad anyway. Brogan's eyes never left Ephraim's face. The silence stretched tight as a bowstring between them, broken only by the frightened whimpers of the twins and the crack of burning logs in the fireplace. Finally, Brogan lowered his rifle slightly. "Till morning," he said. "You bring them into town first thing, or I'll come back with more men. And next time, I won't be so understanding." "Much obliged," Ephraim said stiffly, though the words tasted like ashes in his mouth. The deputy gestured to his companions, and they filed out into the swirling snow. Brogan paused in the doorway, looking back over his shoulder. "Don't try anything foolish, Holt. You can't outrun the law." The door slammed shut behind them. Ephraim's hand shook as he dropped the heavy wooden bar across it, then checked that his pistol was loaded. The twins were crying softly now, clinging to each other beneath the quilts. "Hush now," he soothed, sitting beside them on the bunk. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, I promise." The girl held out Mary's necklace, tears streaming down her face. "Mama said you'd help us, and I will." Ephraim took the silver cross gently, turning it over in his calloused hands. There, scratched faintly on the back, was the name he'd carved so many years ago. Mary. The fire popped and hissed as he settled into his chair beside the bunk. Outside, the snow fell thicker, driven by a rising wind. Ephraim knew Brogan would make good on his threat when morning came, but for now they were safe in the cabin's warmth. "I need to tell you something," he said softly, looking at the twins' scared faces. "I knew your mama long ago, before either of you were born." He ran his thumb across the silver cross. "I made this for her back when we were young and thought we'd spend our lives together." The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" Ephraim nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "She was the kindest, bravest woman I ever knew. And if you'll let me, I'd like to keep you safe, just like she wanted. Would that be all right?" The twins looked at each other, then back at him. The girl reached out and touched his rough hand with her small one. "Yes," she whispered. Snow whispered against the cabin walls as darkness gathered outside. Ephraim knew danger pressed close Brogan, and his men would return with the dawn. But for now, he had this moment with Mary's children, and the chance to make right what had gone wrong so many years ago. Dawn brought no relief from the winter's grip. The storm had grown fiercer through the night, howling around the cabin's eaves like a hungry wolf. Ephraim stood at the window, watching thick snow cascade from laden pine boughs. The weather would keep Brogan and his men away for now. Behind him, the twins stirred on the bunk, their small faces less drawn than the night before. The boy Samuel, he'd learned, sat up first, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His sister Sarah followed, clutching the quilt around her shoulders. "Reckon we ought to get some breakfast started," Ephraim said, turning from the window. "Would you like to help?" The children nodded eagerly. Ephraim showed them how to feed small sticks into the cook stove, explaining how the kindling needed to be dry and arranged just so. Sarah's eyes lit up when the flames caught, warming her hands near the stove door. "My turn," Samuel insisted, carefully adding another piece of wood. "That's right," Ephraim encouraged. "Nice and steady now." While the fire built, he taught them to measure dry beans into the pot, adding water and a precious pinch of salt. Sarah stood on a wooden crate to stir with a long spoon, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "Mama always said, 'Grace before eating,'" she said softly. Ephraim's throat tightened. "Then we'll say grace too." When the beans were ready, they gathered around the rough-hewn table. The twins folded their hands automatically, and Ephraim bowed his head, following their lead. Samuel whispered the familiar words, "Thank you for this food and all our blessings," while Sarah added quietly, "And thank you for giving us pay too." "Take care of us?" Ephraim's head jerked up, his heart stumbling at the word. Ah, such a simple thing, yet it filled his chest with an ache sweeter than anything he'd known. Sarah met his gaze shyly, uncertain if she'd said something wrong. "That's right, little one," he managed, voice rough with emotion. "I'm here to take care of you both." After the meal, while the twins played quietly with some carved wooden animals Ephraim had made years ago, he stepped outside into the swirling snow. The storm wrapped around him like a blanket, muffling all sound except the whisper of falling flakes. He sank to his knees in the deep powder, overwhelmed by memory. Mary's laughter echoed in his mind, bright and clear as a mountain stream, just as it had been that spring day when they'd planned their future together. Before her family had moved west, before the long silence, before everything changed. "Lord," he whispered, snow gathering on his shoulders, "I don't know if I'm fit to raise these little ones." but Mary trusted me to try. Give me wisdom enough not to fail them. When he returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, the twins were waiting with something in their hands, a worn leather pouch pulled from their small bundle of belongings. Mama said to give you this, Samuel explained, holding it out. If we found you. With trembling fingers, Ephraim untied the pouch's drawstring. Inside lay a packet of folded papers and a small book bound in deer hide, its edges softened with use. He recognized Mary's careful stitching in the binding, the way she'd always mended everything to last. The children crowded close as he lit the oil lantern, its warm glow pushing back the storm's gray light. Setting aside the papers for later, Ephraim opened the journal with reverent hands. Mary's flowing script filled the pages, familiar as his own heartbeat. April 15th, he read silently. The twins grow stronger each day, so like their father in spirit, though they have my coloring. Samuel has Ephraim's quiet way of studying things, while Sarah laughs as freely as he once did. How I wish he could know them. Ephraim's vision blurred. He turned pages carefully, following Mary's journey through the years, her joy in the children's first steps, her grief when illness took her husband, her determination to find Ephraim again, knowing her time grew short. The cough worsens, a recent entry read. I fear I haven't long, but I must get the children to Ephraim. He has a good heart, though life has hardened him. They will heal each other, these three wounded souls, if only I can bring them together. In time, Sarah touched his wet cheek. Don't be sad, Pa. I'm not sad, little one. Ephraim gathered both children close, breathing in the scent of wood smoke in their hair. Your mama gave me the greatest gift anyone could give. She brought you home to me. The lamp's gentle glow cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as Ephraim settled into his chair, Mary's journal open on his lap. The twins nestled in their blankets, eyes heavy but fighting sleep to hear more about their mother. Your mama wrote so much about you both, Ephraim said softly, turning weathered pages with careful fingers. He began to read aloud, his voice growing steady as Mary's words carried him back through time. I remember the day I first saw Ephraim. He read, tall and strong at the summer social, offering me wild strawberries he'd picked that morning. How his hands trembled when he carved me the silver cross I wear still. Sarah touched the necklace at her throat while Samuel listened intently, chin propped on his hands. Ephraim continued reading, sharing Mary's account of their courtship, the stolen moments, shared dreams, and plans for a future together. Then came the painful parts. Mary wrote of her family's sudden decision to move west, of letters that never reached their destinations, of years passing with only silence between them. Ephraim's voice grew thick as he read how she believed him lost, how she'd found unexpected love with a Cherokee lawman who showed her kindness when she most needed it. He was a good man, Mary had written, who honored both his ways and mine. But always, in quiet moments, my heart remembered Ephraim. The children's breathing had grown deep and even, but Ephraim kept reading, tears falling freely now. Mary's words spoke of her joy in the twins, how she saw traces of her first love in their faces. Her final entries revealed her desperate race against time, knowing the consumption would take her before winter's end. I pray they find him, she'd written in shaking script. I pray he'll understand and love them as I have. They are the best of both worlds, carrying hope for peace between two peoples. Ephraim closed the journal and held it to his chest, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. All these years, he'd carried such bitterness, never knowing the whole truth. Now Mary's words had washed it away, leaving only love and responsibility in its place. When dawn broke, the storm had settled to gentle flurries. Ephraim wrapped the twins in every blanket he owned and settled them on his most gentle horse. The ride to town was slow, with Ephraim leading the horse carefully through deep drifts. Main Street stood quiet under its blanket of snow, but faces, appeared in windows as they passed. Ephraim felt the weight of suspicious stares, heard the whispers that followed them. The twins pressed closer to him, sensing the tension in the air. At the general store, Herbert Dawson stood behind his counter, lips curled in a sneer as they entered. Other customers drew back, creating a circle of empty space around Ephraim and the children. "Well," Dawson drawled, "if it ain't the mountain man, bringing them half-breeds right into my store." The twins flinched at his tone. Ephraim's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "These children are Mary Lathrop's," he declared, loud enough for everyone to hear, "and they're my flesh and blood. I've come to buy them proper clothes and supplies." Dawson's face reddened. "Your flesh and blood? That's a mighty interesting claim, considering their looks." "Their mother was my betrothed," Ephraim said firmly. "I'm claiming them as mine, and any man who has something to say about it can say it to my face." The silence in the store grew thick. Finally, Dawson began, pulling items from his shelves, though his movements were sharp with anger. Ephraim paid in silver coins, gathering their purchases with deliberate calm. As evening approached, Ephraim led the twins through fresh snow to the small parsonage beside the church. Reverend Thorne answered his knock promptly, concern creasing his gentle face as he ushered them inside. "I heard talk in town," the preacher said, settling them near his fire. "I feared there might be trouble." Ephraim handed him Mary's journal. "I need your help, Reverend. These children are all I have left of the woman I loved. The town's already turned against them, and Deputy Brogan means to take them away." The Reverend read in silence, occasionally nodding or brushing away tears. When he finished, he looked at the twins with deep compassion. "Let us pray together," he said, gathering them all into a circle. His prayer was simple but heartfelt, asking for guidance and protection. "I'll speak to the congregation on Sunday," Reverend Thorne promised, gripping Ephraim's shoulder. "These children need a father's love, not the cold walls of an orphanage. God's hand is in this, brother. He brought them to you for a purpose." Morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Ephraim led the twins down Main Street. They barely reached the general store when Deputy Brogan's sharp voice cut through the crisp air. "That's far enough, Holt." The deputy strode forward, papers clutched in his gloved hand. "These here are custody orders. The children are coming with me." Townsfolk paused their morning errands, gathering to watch. Ephraim felt the twins press against his legs, their small hands gripping his coat. He placed protective hands on their shoulders. "Now wait just a moment," Reverend Thorne called, hurrying across the street from his parsonage. His arrival drew more onlookers, including Herbert Dawson, who emerged from his store with a satisfied smirk. "There's nothing to wait for," Brogan sneered. "Law's clear about orphans." Ephraim reached into his coat, withdrawing Mary's journal. "They ain't orphans," he said firmly. "Their mother was my betrothed." He opened the journal carefully, removing a folded document from between its pages. "And here's proof." The marriage certificate, though yellowed with age, remained crisp and legible. Reverend Thorne took it gently, holding it where others could see the official seal. "This is a legal marriage certificate," the preacher announced. "It shows Ephraim Holt and Mary Lathrop were lawfully wed before she disappeared west." Brogan scoffed. "That paper's probably forged. Besides, everyone knows who their real father was." "Watch your tone," Ephraim warned, his voice low but carrying across the suddenly quiet street. "Mary was my wife before circumstances tore us apart. These are my children, and I aim to raise them proper." The gathered crowd shifted, whispers passing between them. Some faces showed disgust, but others, particularly among the women, softened with understanding. "The law requires we consider all evidence," Reverend Thorne insisted, standing firmly beside Ephraim. "This certificate deserves proper review by the circuit judge." Brogan's face reddened, but he couldn't argue with the preacher's reasonable tone. "Fine," he spat. "But this ain't over, Holt. Not by a long shot." He turned sharply and stalked away, snow crunching under his angry steps. Ephraim didn't linger in town. He guided the twins home, feeling eyes following their every move. The ride back to the cabin was quiet. Both children lost in thought as afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows. Ephraim set about teaching them the rhythms of mountain life. He showed Daniel how to hold the hatchet safely, guiding his small hands as they split kindling together. "That's it, son," he encouraged as Daniel successfully split a piece. "Slow and steady does it." Meanwhile, Ruth sat in Ephraim's chair, determination on her face as she learned to push a needle through thick wool socks. Her stitches were uneven, but she didn't give up. Reminding Ephraim so much of Mary, it made his heart ache. The cabin filled with warmth as evening approached. Ephraim stirred a pot of venison stew, adding wild onions and the last of his dried corn. The twins set their work aside to help, Daniel carefully carrying bowls to the table while Ruth laid out spoons. Over supper, Ephraim shared stories of their mother. "Your mama could outride any man in the valley," he told them, smiling at the memory. She'd race her paint pony through the meadow, her hair flying free as a bird. The children leaned forward, hungry for every detail. "Did she sing?" Ruth asked softly. "I remember songs." "She had the sweetest voice in the church choir," Ephraim confirmed. "Used to sing while she worked, filling the air with hymns and trail songs alike." He told them how Mary had taught the local children their letters, how she'd always kept a garden full of healing herbs, how she'd stood tall and proud no matter what life brought her way, when the bowls were empty and the fire burned. Lo, Ephraim tucked them into the bed he'd built in the corner. Ruth pulled out Mary's silver cross, and together they knelt beside the bed. "Our Father," the twins began in unison, their small voices strong and sure. Ephraim found himself joining in, words he hadn't spoken in years coming back like old friends. Just as they finished their prayers, hoofbeats thundered past the cabin. Ephraim moved swiftly to the window, but the rider had already disappeared into the darkness. His hand strayed to his rifle, checking it was loaded. The twins didn't notice his unease, already drifting toward sleep. He tucked the blankets around them more securely, knowing that whatever trouble was coming, he would face it head-on. These children were his last link to Mary, his chance at the family they dreamed of so long ago. He wouldn't let anyone take them away. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. The valley transformed into a pristine white blanket. Ephraim hitched the wagon early, filling it with hay and warm blankets for the twins' comfort. He had polished their boots the night before, and Ruth wore her best dress freshly mended by lamplight. Daniel's borrowed suit hung loose on his thin frame, but his eyes shone with excitement at the prospect of church. The wagon wheels creaked through fresh snow as they made their way into town. Ephraim couldn't help but notice how the children sat straighter as they approached the log church, its simple cross reaching toward the winter sky. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. As they climbed down from the wagon, Ephraim heard the whispers begin. Church folks gathered on the steps paused in their greetings, eyes following the unlikely family. Some turned away, while others murmured behind gloved hands. "Hold your heads high," Ephraim whispered to the twins, guiding them toward the entrance. Ruth's small hand found his, squeezing tight. Inside, the church glowed with morning light and lampshine. They chose a pew near the back, but there was no hiding from the curious glances. Daniel pressed close to Ephraim's side, his sister following suit on the other. Reverend Thorne stood to begin the service, his kind eye sweeping the congregation. His sermon rang clear in the hushed space. "Today we speak of God's boundless love," he began, opening his Bible. "For it is written that he welcomes all children into his arms, regardless of their parentage or place of birth. The preacher's words fell like gentle rain on parched earth. He spoke of compassion, of Christ's example in embracing those whom others rejected. Without directly mentioning the twins, he reminded his flock that every child was precious in the Lord's sight. Let us be worthy of his grace, Reverend Thorne concluded, by showing that same love to all his children. As the final hymn faded, something shifted in the church's atmosphere. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, approached first, a covered pie dish in her hands. "Apple and cinnamon," she said softly, presenting it to Ruth. "My grandmother's recipe." Others followed. Miss Sarah, who taught at the schoolhouse, brought a patchwork quilt she'd sewn herself. "For cold nights," she explained, draping it around Daniel's shoulders. Women who had turned away earlier now offered hesitant smiles. Several men nodded respectfully to Ephraim. Even old Widow Jensen, known for her sharp tongue, pressed a jar of preserved peaches into his hands. The afternoon stretched sweet and gentle as honey. Children from the congregation, initially shy, began including the twins in their games in the churchyard. Ruth's laughter rang out as she joined a circle of girls playing cat's cradle. Daniel watched the older boys pitch pennies until they waved him over to try. Ephraim stood with Reverend Thorne, watching the scene unfold. "Reckon there's hope after all," the preacher said quietly. "Reckon so," Ephraim agreed, his throat tight with emotion. The sun was setting when they finally headed home, the wagon laden with gifts and good wishes. The twins clutched their treasures, faces glowing despite the cold. Back at the cabin, Ephraim stoked the fire high and set out bowls of Mrs. Peterson's pie. The new quilt draped across their laps as they ate, sharing the bench by the hearth. "Shall we have some music?" Ephraim asked, remembering Mary's love of evening hymns. Ruth nodded eagerly. "Mama taught us Amazing Grace," she said. They began. Softly, the children's voices tremulous at first. But as verse followed verse, their confidence grew. Ruth's clear soprano and Daniel's sweet tenor filled the cabin, rising like prayers toward heaven. Ephraim joined in, his deeper voice supporting theirs. The lamplight cast their shadows on the log walls as they sang hymn after hymn. For the first time since finding the twins in the snow, Ephraim felt true peace settle in his heart. Perhaps they could build a life here after all, not just surviving, but truly living as a family. Their singing ended only when Daniel's voice caught. He coughed once, then again, the sound harsh and deep in his chest. Ephraim's happiness shattered like ice. "Just the cold air," Daniel said quickly, but his face had paled. Ephraim helped him into bed, tucking the new quilt around both children. He smoothed Daniel's dark hair back from his forehead, remembering too many winter graves. "Try to rest, son," he murmured, keeping his voice steady despite his rising fear. "We'll have some warm tea in the morning." Outside the cabin windows, clouds were gathering thick and dark. The wind had shifted, carrying the promise of another storm. But Ephraim's attention remained fixed on the sound of his son's breathing, each raspy inhale making his heart clench with worry. The bitter cold settled over the valley like iron, turning the world brittle and harsh. Inside Ephraim's cabin, Daniel's cough had deepened, rattling in his chest with each labored breath. Ruth hovered near her brother's bed, pressing cool claws to his forehead as Ephraim had shown her. "He's burning up, Pa," she whispered, her dark eyes wide with worry. Ephraim touched Daniel's cheek, his weathered hand gentle against the boy's flushed skin. The heat radiating from his son made his stomach clench with fear. He'd seen fever take too many good folks in these mountains, and the thought of losing Daniel now, so soon after finding him, was more than he could bear. "I'm riding to town for medicine," Ephraim said, already pulling on his heavy coat. "The Petersons agreed to watch you, Ruth. I won't be gone long." Ruth's lower lip trembled. "I want to stay with Daniel." "No, sweetie. If his fever's catching, I won't risk you both." Ephraim gathered her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. The Petersons are good folk. They'll keep you warm and fed till I return. After settling Ruth with their neighbors, Ephraim mounted his horse and pressed hard through the snow toward town. The general store's windows glowed yellow against the gathering dusk. Inside, the storekeeper's familiar sneer greeted him. "Need medicine," Ephraim said, laying out what little coin he had. "My boy's burning with fever." The storekeeper counted the coins slowly. "Not enough here, Holt, and no credit for half-breeds." "He's my son," Ephraim growled, his hands clenching. "So you claim." The storekeeper swept the coins aside. "Maybe if you turned them over to proper authorities when told, the boy wouldn't be sick now." Before Ephraim could respond, a firm voice cut through the tension. "I'll help with the boy." Mrs. Talbot, the town's midwife, stood in the doorway, her medical bag clutched in work-worn hands. Without acknowledging the storekeeper's scowl, she pressed a packet of herbs into Ephraim's palm. "Willow bark for the fever," she murmured, "and horehound for his chest. Steep them strong, keep him warm, and call me if he worsens." Her eyes held his. "No child suffers while I have medicine to spare." Ephraim's throat tightened. "Much obliged, ma'am." The ride home seemed endless. Snow began falling harder, driven by a rising wind that cut through his clothes like knives. Inside the cabin, Daniel's fever had climbed higher. His small face was flushed scarlet, his breathing shallow and quick. Ephraim worked through the night, brewing the herbs into strong tea and coaxing spoonfuls between Daniel's cracked lips. He sponged his son's burning skin with cool water, whispering prayers he'd half forgotten from his own childhood. Ruth had slipped back from the Petersons in the dark, refusing to stay away. She knelt beside Daniel's bed, Mary's silver cross, pressed between her palms as she prayed. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't take him. He's all I got left of Mama, 'cept Pa." Ephraim's heart cracked at her words. He gathered her close with one arm, still bathing Daniel's face with his free hand. Together they kept vigil as the storm raged outside. Father and daughter united in their desperate hope. Dawn brought no relief. Daniel's fever blazed hotter, and his breathing grew more labored. Ephraim had just finished brewing a fresh pot of willow bark tea when hoofbeats thundered in the yard. The cabin door burst open, letting in a blast of snow and Deputy Brogan's tall figure. Two other men flanked him, rifles cradled in their arms. "Got papers here, Holt," Brogan announced, shaking snow from his hat. He pulled an official-looking document from inside his coat. "County judge says these children are to be removed to proper care. No more delays." Ephraim straightened slowly from Daniel's bedside. "My boy's burning with fever. He can't be moved." "Not your boy," Brogan corrected, his voice hard. "And the judge's orders don't mention waiting for convenient times." Ruth pressed against Ephraim's side, trembling. Daniel stirred on the bed, his breathing raspy in the tense silence. "Please," Ephraim said, the word torn from his throat. "The boy could die if you take him now." Brogan's eyes remained cold. "Papers say now." "Holt, step aside." The deputy moved forward, the official document extended like a weapon. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and Daniel's labored breathing filled the cabin like a prayer, unanswered. Deputy Brogan's boots thundered across the wooden floor as he advanced, brandishing the papers like a weapon, his cold eyes fixed on the twins as if they were contraband rather than children. "By order of the county judge," he announced, voice sharp as winter wind, "these children are now wards of the territory. Step aside, Holt." Ephraim planted his feet firmly between Brogan and the bed where Daniel lay burning with fever. Ruth pressed close against his leg, fingers clutching his trouser fabric. "My son's sick," Ephraim said, each word measured and deliberate. He needs care and rest, not a freezing journey to some orphanage. The law doesn't bend for your convenience. Brogan thrust the papers forward, or your claims of kinship. I will not surrender them. Ephraim's voice dropped low, dangerous as a mother bear's growl. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The deputy's face hardened. Then I'll return with more men. Enough to overcome any resistance. He swept his gaze around the cabin, lingering on Ephraim's rifle by the door. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Holt. After Brogan stormed out, the cabin felt hollowed by silence save for Daniel's labored breathing. Ephraim's legs gave way, and he sank onto the chair by the fire. Despair and rage warred in his chest, each breath burning like acid dot through the long hours of night. He tended to Daniel. He spooned willow bark tea between the boy's cracked lips, bathed his burning forehead, and whispered prayers that felt as brittle as dead leaves. Exhaustion dragged at his bones, but he dared not sleep. Ruth curled up beside his chair, her small frame trembling. Pa, she whispered, voice thin with fear. I'm scared. What if they take us away? What if Daniel? Her words trailed off into silence. Ephraim stroked her dark hair, so like Mary's. God doesn't abandon his children. Little one, he murmured, though doubt gnawed at his heart like a hungry wolf. He sees us, even here in the dark. Daniel thrashed in his fevered dreams, calling for his mother. Each cry pierced Ephraim's heart like a blade. He pressed a cool cloth to the boy's face, wondering if this was God's punishment for his years of bitterness, for turning away from faith when Mary was lost to him. The cabin walls seemed to close in, threatening to suffocate him. Watch your brother, he told Ruth. I need a moment outside. The night air struck him like a physical blow as he stepped out. Snow crunched under his knees as he sank down, his breath forming clouds in the freezing dark. Above, stars glittered, like ice, remote and indifferent to human suffering. Lord, he whispered, voice raw, I ain't been much for praying these past years. Reckon I've harbored too much bitterness, too much anger at what was taken from me. His fingers dug into the snow, the cold biting deep. But these children, they're innocent. They need their pa. Need someone to stand between them and a world that sees them as less than human. Tears froze on his cheeks as he continued, I'm not strong enough alone. Never was. Mary knew I needed faith more than I needed pride. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. Please, Lord, don't let them take my children. Don't let my boy die. I'll give anything, my life, my pride, whatever you ask. Just please. In the distance, wolves howled, a sound as lonely as his own heart. The silence that followed felt heavy with judgment, or perhaps mercy. Ephraim couldn't tell anymore. Inside, Daniel's voice rose in delirium. Mama? Mama, where? Are you? Ephraim pushed himself up from the snow, his joints creaking with cold and exhaustion. He stumbled back inside, where Ruth sat vigilant beside her brother's bed, still clutching Mary's silver cross. Pa? She asked, her young face lined with worry far beyond her years. I'm here, he answered, gathering her close with one arm while reaching to check Daniel's fever with his free hand. The boy's skin burned against his palm, hot as banked coals. I'm right here, and I ain't leaving either of you, no matter what comes. Through the window, the wolves' cries echoed again, closer now, their wild voices filling the night with a song of hunger and survival. Daniel tossed in his fever dreams, lost in a place Ephraim couldn't reach, while Ruth's prayers whispered, soft as falling snow in the darkened cabin. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-laden valley in shades of rose and gold. Ephraim's weary eyes snapped alert at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. His heart hammered as he reached for his rifle, expecting Brogan's promised return with armed men. Through the frost-covered window, Shadows moved against the pale morning light, but instead of the deputy's threatening form, Reverend Thorne's familiar silhouette appeared, helping Mrs. Talbot down from her wagon. Relief flooded through Ephraim as he unbarred the door. "We came as soon as we could," Mrs. Talbot announced, her arms laden with baskets. She bustled past him, her practical skirt swishing against the floorboards. "That poor child needs proper tending." Reverend Thorne followed, carrying supplies. "Word spread about the boy's fever," he explained softly, "and about Brogan's threats." Mrs. Talbot was already at Daniel's bedside, her experienced hands checking his temperature. She pulled bottles and packets from her basket, mixing herbs with practiced efficiency. "This tea will help break the fever," she murmured, her voice gentle as she roused the sick child. "Come now, little one. Drink for me." More hoofbeats approached. Ephraim tensed again, but Reverend Thorne laid a steadying hand on his arm. "Look," he said, pointing through the window. Wagons were coming up the trail, carrying familiar faces. Townspeople who had once turned away in suspicion or disgust. Old man Peterson, who owned the livery stable, carried split firewood. The Cooper sisters brought steaming pots of chicken broth. Even young Tom Wilson, whose father had died in Apache raids, approached with his mother, both bearing baskets of provisions. The cabin that had known only silence for so many years, now filled with quiet activity. Women took turns spooning broth into Daniel's mouth, while men stacked firewood and repaired a drafty window. Ruth watched it all with wide eyes, staying close to Ephraim's side. The most surprising arrival was Jack Hawkins, a gruff rancher known for his hatred of Indians. He stomped snow from his boots and laid a fresh-killed deer on Ephraim's table. When Ephraim started to speak, Hawkins raised a weathered hand. "Years back," he said gruffly, "my boy got lost in Apache territory. Their people found him, fed him, guided him home safe. Never sat right with me, owing that debt." He glanced at the twins. "Reckon helping Mary's children might square it some." The cabin grew warm with bodies and breath. Someone started a hymn, soft and low, and others joined in. Mrs. Talbot directed it all like a general, assigning tasks and supervising Daniel's care. The boy's breathing seemed easier now, though fever still flushed his cheeks, thought Reverend Thorne. Gathered everyone in a circle around Daniel's bed. "Let us pray," he said, his voice carrying peace. "For this child's healing, for this family's protection, and for our own hearts to grow in understanding." Ephraim bowed his head, overwhelmed by the sight of former enemies standing shoulder to shoulder, asking God's mercy for his son. He felt humbled, watching prejudice melt like spring snow under the warm sun of compassion as evening approached. Most folks headed home, promising to return tomorrow. Mrs. Talbot left detailed instructions for Daniel's care and more medicine. The cabin settled into quiet again, but it felt different now, as if hope had seeped into the very walls. Ruth helped Ephraim tidy up, her small hands folding blankets the neighbors had brought. "Pa," she whispered, "did Mama know all these people?" Ephraim pulled out Mary's journal, settling into his chair. "Let's read and find out," he said, drawing her onto his lap. By lamplight, they discovered Mary's accounts of life in town. Small kindnesses given and received. Bridges built between cultures through simple acts of mercy. Ruth's eyes grew heavy as he read, her head nestling against his chest. Her small fingers wrapped around his calloused hand, holding tight even as sleep claimed her. Ephraim sat still, cherishing her trust, watching Daniel's chest rise and fall in steadier rhythm. The boy's fever hadn't broken, but his breathing was stronger, more irregular. Mrs. Talbot's medicines were working their quiet magic. Outside, snow began falling again, but inside, warmth held firm. Hope flickered like the lamp's flame, delicate but enduring, casting light in the shadows that had seemed impenetrable. Just days before, the winter sun hung low in the afternoon sky when hoofbeats thundered up the snow-packed trail. Deputy Brogan, led a group of 6 men toward the cabin, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. Ephraim stood in his doorway, shoulders squared, watching their approach. But this time, he wasn't alone. Reverend Thorne stepped forward, Mary's journal held firmly in his hands. Mrs. Talbot and a dozen other townsfolk formed a wall between the deputy and the cabin porch. Even old man Peterson stood there, his ancient shotgun resting casually against his shoulder. "Move aside," Brogan commanded, swinging down from his horse. Snow crunched under his boots as he strode forward, official papers clutched in his fist. "I've got orders to take these children to proper authorities." "You'll do no such thing," Mrs. Talbot declared, her voice sharp as winter wind. She planted herself directly in his path, gray hair escaping her bonnet. "That boy's fighting fever, and you'll not drag him through this cold." Brogan's face reddened. "The law says—" "The law," Reverend Thorne interrupted quietly, "recognizes legitimate marriage and paternal rights." He opened Mary's journal, carefully turning to the documented proof within. "This certificate shows Mary Lathrop and Ephraim Holt were legally married 20 years ago in Kansas Territory." "That doesn't change what she became," Brogan sneered. "Living with savages." "Mary was a healer," Jack Hawkins spoke up unexpectedly. The rancher's rough voice carried across the yard. "Saved my boy's life when snake bit him." "Them Apache ways she learned? They work better than any fancy doctors." "Medicine." Others nodded, adding their voices. "She helped birth my twins. Tended my ma through fever. Never took payment when folks couldn't pay." Reverend Thorne held the journal higher. "We have testimony here from dozens of townspeople. Mary Lathrop Holt was a respected member of this community. Her children belong with their father." Inside the cabin, Ruth pressed against Ephraim's leg, watching through the crack in the door. Daniel stirred on his sickbed, coughing weakly. Ephraim's hand tightened on his daughter's shoulder, ready to defend his family at any cost. Brogan glanced at his men, but they looked uncertain now, shifting in their saddles. Several touched their hat brims respectfully to Mrs. Talbot. One by one, they began turning their horses away. "This isn't over," Brogan blustered, but his voice had lost its edge. His hand moved toward his badge, fingers tracing its outline as if seeking reassurance. "Yes," Reverend Thorne said gently, "it is." The deputy stood alone now, his men already heading back down the trail. The townspeople waited, silent and steady as the mountains themselves. Finally, Brogan's shoulders sagged. He unpinned his badge, letting it fall into the snow. "Reckon I never was much good at being the law," he muttered. Without another word, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving the badge glinting in the snow like a discarded dream. A cheer went up from the gathered crowd. Ruth burst through the door, running to hug Mrs. Talbot's skirts. Ephraim followed more slowly, cradling Daniel wrapped in blankets. The boy's fever still burned, but a weak smile touched his lips at the sound of celebration. "Thank you," Ephraim said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you. Family takes care of its own," Mrs. Talbot declared firmly, smoothing Ruth's hair. "And like it or not, Ephraim Holt, you and these children are family now." As the sun set, the townsfolk gradually dispersed, leaving behind promises of help and more visits. The cabin settled into evening quiet, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and Daniel's occasional coughing. Ephraim sat in his chair beside the sickbed, unwilling to sleep until his son's fever broke. Ruth curled in his lap, already dreaming. The silver cross necklace gleamed at her throat, catching firelight like a star. Through the window, snow drifted down in lazy spirals, blanketing the valley in pristine white. The silence felt different now, not the hollow quiet of loneliness, but the peaceful hush of home. Ephraim watched his children's faces in the firelight, marveling at how completely they had changed his world. "Rest easy," he whispered, touching Daniel's warm forehead. "Pa's here. Pa's watching over you." Outside, the snow continued falling, erasing all tracks, covering the valley in a clean page ready for new stories to be written. Days melted together, like snowflakes on warm glass, as Ephraim maintained his vigil. He dozed in short bursts, jerking awake at every change in Daniel's labored breathing. Ruth proved herself invaluable, her small hands steady as she brought fresh water from the pump. Her feet whisper quiet on the wooden floors as she helped tend her brother. "Here, Pa," she would say, touching his shoulder when his head drooped. "I made more broth." Ephraim's heart swelled each time she called him that, even as worry for Daniel gnawed at his bones. The boy's fever burned stubbornly, despite Mrs. Talbot's herbs and the constant cool compresses. Through long nights, Ephraim prayed, his whispered words mixing with the snap and hiss of pine logs in the fireplace. Then one crystal morning, as sunrise painted the cabin walls gold, Daniel's eyes fluttered open. The fever glaze had vanished, replaced by clear recognition. His cracked lips curved into a weak smile. "Pa," he whispered. Ephraim's laugh came out half-sob. With trembling hands, he gathered the boy gently into his arms, mindful of how frail he felt after the long illness. Ruth scrambled onto the bed beside them, her face glowing. "Thank you, Lord," Ephraim breathed, holding both children close. Their arms wound around his neck, faces pressed against his shoulders. "We're safe now, Pa," Ruth whispered, and Daniel echoed her softly. "We're safe now." The words unlocked something in Ephraim's chest. Tears spilled freely down his weathered cheeks as he rocked them, remembering lonely years when he thought he would never hear children's voices in his home. Later that morning, when Daniel felt strong enough, Ephraim bundled both children warmly and carried them outside. The valley stretched before them like a dream, every tree branch wrapped in crystal, every snowdrift sparkling. The sun transformed the wilderness into a sea of diamonds. "It's like heaven," Ruth breathed, her eyes wide. "More like God's own jewelry box," Ephraim said, settling onto the porch bench with a child tucked under each arm. Together, they bowed their heads. "Thank you, Lord," Ephraim prayed aloud, his deep voice gentle, "for healing, for mercy, for bringing us together as family." "Amen," the twins whispered in unison. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, Ephraim sat by the fire with Mary's journal. He had read it cover to cover during his vigil, but something made him turn to the final pages again. There, in Mary's flowing script, he found words he had been too worried to truly absorb before. "My dearest Ephraim, if Providence allows these children to find you, know that my love for you never died. You are my first love, and in giving you these children, our children, I give you my heart complete. Be the father I know you can be. Show them the gentle spirit I remember, the strength that made me love you, and know that I go to God's embrace, peaceful, knowing they will have your protection and care. Until we meet again in glory, I remain forever yours, Mary." Ephraim knelt by the hearth, tears falling onto the warm pages. The firelight caught the silver cross around Ruth's neck as she slept, matching the glint of tears on his cheeks. "Thank you, Mary," he whispered, "for believing in me, for trusting me with such precious gifts. I promise to love them enough for us both." The cabin was quiet except for the children's soft breathing and the settling of logs in the fireplace. Outside, stars wheeled above the snow-covered valley, bright as hope itself. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm's fury spent at last. Ephraim stood at the cabin window, watching sunlight sparkle across unblemished snow. His heart felt heavy with purpose. Today they would honor Mary properly. As a family, he had prepared the children gently for this journey, explaining how he had found their mother's final resting place and marked it with care. Now, as he hitched the horses to the wooden sled, he heard the twins' soft footsteps behind him. "Is it far, Pa?" Ruth asked, clutching her brother's mittened hand. Both children wore their warmest clothes, their cheeks already pink in the cold. "Not too far, little ones," Ephraim answered, lifting them one at a time into the sled. He tucked thick buffalo robes around them, making sure not a whisper of wind could reach their still fragile bodies. Daniel had only been out of bed for 3 days, but his eyes were bright with determination. The horses' hooves crunched through fresh snow as Ephraim guided them along the trail. He had chosen the gentlest path, though his heart remembered the desperate tracking of those first days following Mary's faint trail through the storm. Finding her too late, carrying her body to this peaceful place beneath the pines. The journey took nearly an hour. The children huddled close, sometimes pointing at deer tracks or snow-laden branches, but mostly riding in thoughtful silence. Finally, Ephraim drew the horses to a halt beside a stand of towering pines. "Here we are," he said softly, helping them from the sled. He carried Mary's journal, wrapped carefully in oilskin, tucked inside his coat. The grave lay beneath the tallest pine, marked with a wooden cross he had carved himself. He had cleared the snow away just yesterday, laying fresh pine boughs across the mound. Now he knelt beside it, drawing the children close. "Your mama was the bravest person I ever knew," Ephraim began, his voice rough with emotion. "She crossed mountains and valleys to bring you to me, never stopping until she knew you'd be safe." Ruth touched the cross with trembling fingers. "Did she hurt much, Pa?" Ephraim gathered her close. "No, sweetheart. The cold took her peaceful like. While she was sleeping, she'd made sure you were sheltered in that hollow log, wrapped in every blanket she had." Daniel leaned against his other shoulder. "She used to sing to us," he whispered. "Apache songs and church hymns both." "That was your mama," Ephraim nodded, tears falling freely now. "She loved both worlds, the settler ways and the Apache wisdom. She wanted you to know both paths, to walk proud in both traditions." He withdrew the journal from his coat, holding it reverently. "In here, she wrote about her dreams for you both. How she wanted you raised knowing the stories of your Apache father's people, their respect for the land and their deep understanding of God's creation. But she also wanted you to know the settlers' ways, the reading and writing and hymns she loved." The children watched solemnly as he placed the journal against the wooden cross, weighing it down with smooth river stones he had gathered. "I promise you, Mary," Ephraim spoke to the grave, his voice carrying clear in the winter stillness, "I'll raise them honoring both paths. They'll know the wisdom of both peoples and the love that bridged 2 worlds." Ruth began to cry then, soft hitching sobs that shook her small frame. Daniel wrapped his arms around his sister, his own tears falling silently. Ephraim gathered them both into his embrace, letting them grieve freely for the mother they had lost and find comfort in the father they had gained. They knelt together in the snow until the tears subsided. Ephraim led them in a prayer, asking God's blessing on Mary's rest and their path forward. Then he lifted them gently, one in each arm, and carried them back to the sled. The return journey was quiet, broken only by occasional sniffles. Ephraim tucked the furs snugly around his children. His heart sang with fierce joy and gratitude, and took up the reins. As they glided homeward through the gleaming afternoon, he felt Mary's love surrounding them all, a circle unbroken by death or distance, binding their hearts together across every divide. Sunday morning painted the valley in brilliant hues of gold and white. Ephraim woke before dawn, stoking the cabin's fire to warm the room for the twins. His weathered hands moved with gentle purpose as he laid out their church clothes, new garments donated by the caring women of the congregation. Ruth emerged from beneath her quilt first, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Is it time for church, Pa?" "Sure is, little one." Ephraim helped her into a dress of soft blue cotton, carefully combing the tangles from her dark hair. His fingers, more accustomed to setting traps and cleaning rifles, worked slowly but tenderly. As he plaited her hair into neat braids, Daniel needed more coaxing to leave his warm bed, still tired from his long illness. Ephraim helped him button a crisp white shirt and dark wool pants that Mrs. Talbot had altered to fit his small frame. "You look mighty fine," Ephraim told them both, his heart swelling with pride. He put on his own Sunday best, a clean shirt, and his least worn coat, then wrapped the children in warm shawls for the walk to town. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they set out, their boots crunching through fresh snow. Ephraim held their small hands in his large ones, steadying their steps along the path. The twins' breaths puffed white in the cold, their faces bright with excitement. As they approached the log church, other families were already gathering. Ephraim felt the familiar tension creep into his shoulders, remembering past whispers and sideways glances. But today was different. Where once there had been suspicion, now warm smiles greeted them. Mrs. Talbot waved from the church steps, and several men touched their hats respectfully. "Welcome, welcome." Reverend Thorne's voice rang with genuine pleasure as he met them at the door. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he bent to shake the children's hands. "We've saved a special place for you near the front." Ephraim guided the twins down the aisle, past rows of familiar faces that now nodded in friendship rather than judgment. The smooth-worn pew welcomed them, and Ephraim helped the children settle, opening the hymnal to share between them. The first notes of Amazing Grace swelled from the little pump organ, and voices rose to fill the rafters. Ruth's small voice joined in, clear and sweet, while Daniel hummed softly. Ephraim found his own rough baritone joining the chorus, emotion making his voice thick. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in beams of gold. The light seemed to wrap around them like a blessing, warming Ephraim's shoulders and glinting off the children's dark hair. He bowed his head, overwhelmed by a peace he had not known in decades. The twins leaned against him, one on each side, their small bodies trusting and secure beneath the shelter of his coat. Ephraim's heart nearly burst with gratitude. Here, in this sacred space, he was no longer the solitary mountain man, the lonely trapper who had lost his chance at love. Providence had led him to these precious children, restoring the family he thought forever beyond his reach. That Reverend Thorne's sermon spoke of redemption and God's perfect timing. Ephraim listened with new understanding, his rough hands gentle on his children's shoulders. The words seemed meant especially for them, this unlikely family forged through loss and love, bridging cultures and healing hearts. When the final hymn ended, sunshine filled the little church with golden light. Ruth slipped her hand into Ephraim's, while Daniel pressed closer to his side. Together, they stood in that stream of radiance, no longer outsiders but beloved members of the community, their bond sealed by faith and forgiveness. Ephraim looked down at his children's upturned faces, seeing in their eyes the same peace that filled his soul. The wilderness of his lonely years had blossomed into this, a father's heart restored, a family bound together by love stronger than blood, and a future bright with promise. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.